All right, well, good afternoon to one and all. Excited to have you here for the Love of Community Healing and Equitably Rebuilding during the ongoing pandemic. My name is Ryan Smith, and I serve as the Chief External Officer for the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools. But today I also serve as moderator for a dynamic group of leaders who are going to talk about this moment and what it really means for the students, families, and communities that we serve. So welcome. Continue to put your titles and names in the chat, and you'll hear this a little bit later. We love a lit chat room, so please make sure that you're making connections there. Next slide. Today we are going to have an audience poll. We're asking you right now, who's in the room? So there's a number of different sectors here. A lot of our conversation is around how we connect sectors together. So if you would take the time just to list, or pardon me, pick the one that's most appropriate for your role and the work that you do, and we will reveal the results in a second. Next slide. So this is being sponsored, supported by the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools. The Partnership for LA Schools has been around now for 13 years and is an in-district partner to Los Angeles Unified School District. Our mission is that we transform schools to revolutionize school systems, empowering all students with a high quality education. We think about particularly supporting, we think about and do a lot of work supporting high needs schools within Los Angeles, and we're grateful and lucky to do that work. One thing I will say is we have an opportunity to work with 19 dynamic schools, but we also think of ourselves as a systems change organization, that we support and serve those schools in order to learn lessons, in order to lift up promising practice, in order to have an impact on LA Unified and beyond, and we're lucky to do that in this moment. And we collaborate with community partners to leverage additional supports and resources to support our schools. So we don't believe that we're doing this alone. In fact, we really believe that solutions exist with those who are closest to the ground, our students, our families, our educators, and we're lucky to be working with them as we think about transformation. When we look at the next slide, you will see the communities that we get to serve. So we serve Boyle Heights, South Los Angeles, and Watts adjacent. I will say this, oftentimes we do talk about how these communities are in high need, and that's the truth, but these are also really important communities in Los Angeles, and sometimes there's a deficit orientation when we talk about these communities. So I'm just gonna start here. Watts is worth it, and I'm happy that I get to work with the amazing, brilliant students and families in Watts. When we talk about what drives the engine of Los Angeles economically, morally, and has a huge history, we think about South Los Angeles, given how large the region is, and given the leadership it produces, given the brilliance and talent in South LA. So I'm always gonna rep South Los Angeles. And when we talk about the East Side and we talk about Boyle Heights, I don't know if there's any more of one of the communities in Los Angeles that have a rich history about how it's supported social justice and activism. I think about the Chicano blowouts. I think about so much when I think about Boyle Heights and how tight-knit that community is. I think these are the jewels of Los Angeles, and I'm happy we can talk about these communities and center them in our discussion. Next slide. So Love Letter LA webinar series is something we've done this summer, really to think about, in this moment, how do we think differently about supporting a community that we love? And I will say this, I am honored to work with our 19 schools, 14,200 students, and 700 teachers across our network. But I know that when I think about our work, I also think about it being personal. This was really inspired because this year, I actually, in February, lost my father during the pandemic. And I know all of us are experiencing loss in different ways, whether we lost those who are close to us, whether we lost a sense of community. Many of our students were disconnected from each other. Many of us have not seen each other in person for a while. There's a great sense of loss, and there's a sense that something needs to be rebuilt after that loss and even through the loss. So this is inspired. I just want to say, Dad, I see you. I hope you're doing well, Reginald Smith, and this is my love letter to you as well. Next slide. So we are going to look at the results of this poll. Many of you actually responded to which sectors you're a part of. And we'll see here that we have 17% who are parents and students. Can we give a round of applause for our parents and students who we should censor in the work, particularly in education? We have 46 who are from education nonprofits. We have a number of folks who are from the district, and shout out to district administrators, folks working in education and all public systems right now. We know that you're working hard to support our folks, but we have healthcare representation, economic justice representation, social justice and civil rights, and government, a great, really, really amazing cross-section of folks. Thank you for that. And when we think about the next slide, I just want to say that we want to continue the conversation. So you're going to see right now in the chat a number of Twitter handles for all of the speakers, as well as ours. Please make sure to chat this, make sure to post this, make sure to provide your perspectives as we think about how to move the work forward. So thank you. We want you to be a part of this conversation. So welcome. Next slide. So we're honored because this is actually the opening conversation. Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo, who I've known for a very long time, who's been an activist and a leader and a champion and even a media leader, is opening us up with a video about this moment and what it means. She represents many of our schools in Boyle Heights, and she is a proud graduate of Roosevelt High School. Go Rough Riders. So let's kick it off to Assemblymember Carrillo.
Hello, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wendy Carrillo, and I proudly represent the 51st Assembly District, which includes the communities of Northeast LA and East Los Angeles. Thank you for the opportunity to take part in For the Love of Community, Healing and Equitable Rebuilding webinar today. Shout out to Roosevelt High School, my alma mater, a proud partnership school. Go Rough Riders. I'm coming to you live from my apartment here in Sacramento. We are at the last few weeks for end of session, and I wish that I could join you live and in person, but I'm in a committee hearing while you are doing this webinar, but I did want to at least convey a message. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has really shined a light on just how vulnerable California is in a crisis and the disproportionate suffering and losses borne to Latinx, Black, Indigenous, and Native communities. The same communities that stood strong on the front lines as essential workers, securing the continuity of critical functions of the state and the country. They kept us safe, harvested and delivered our food, took care of the sick, and unfortunately ended up taking the hardest hits at home with their own personal health. The virus has torn through our communities and families, took away our loved ones, and left a wide wake of trauma. The normal that preceded the pandemic wasn't cutting it. We must take advantage of this unprecedented opportunity to reimagine what our education and healthcare looks like in the future, especially as we are seeing the surge of COVID-19 in our state and the country because of the Delta variant. With more than 800 vaccinations across LA County, it has never been easier to get vaccinated. You can get vaccinated for free from your car, or you can walk up to a community clinic or a community school. And without an appointment and without insurance, the vaccine is free, it is safe, and no one will ask what your legal status is. I welcome everyone to engage in open conversations about the use of face masks and vaccinations from the standpoint of science and the health and safety of the public. Yes, the overwhelming majority of those who are hospitalized because of COVID-19 have not been vaccinated. This decision impacts everyone around us, at home, at school, at work, on the bus, in the movies, everyone we pass by and share a space with, whether at a restaurant, a church, and so forth. I believe that my mask and my vaccine keep the promise of love thy neighbor. It is critical that we vaccinate all those who are eligible and ensure that our children are safe at school, which is a safe place to learn this fall as we reopen and as we are planning to do more in the future. There are just too many things at stake, and these are only the first steps as we aim to rebuild better for all Californians. We cannot and will not make it through this pandemic if we do not focus our attention and resources to serve historically underserved communities. California will not recover until everyone has equitable access to healthcare and a safe environment to learn. Equity in healthcare looks like you. It looks like me. It addresses specific cultural, linguistic, and environmental factors that guarantee all communities stay strong, safe, healthy, and resilient. Issues such as lack of insurance, transportation, lack of internet access, or digital devices, childcare, our ability to take time off work should not make accessing resources more difficult. It is why I championed the adoption of retroactive paid sick leave so that essential workers could receive back pay and so that every worker could get part-time paid time off work to get through a COVID-19 appointment, vaccination, test, recovery, or take care of a loved one. For the last 3 years, I've been fighting for the elimination of the medical assets test, which has finally been implemented, so no California ever could choose between their healthcare and financial stability. I also fought shoulder to shoulder with colleagues in the legislature and health right proponents across the state to get AB 133 signed by Governor Newsom. California is now the first state in the nation to expand medical eligibility to low-income adults 50 years of age or older, regardless of immigration status, a milestone in the state's progress towards universal health care. Much progress has been made towards recovery, but clearly the work isn't over. Now more than ever, it's time for our communities, our school districts, and state legislators to come together and pool all of our resources for health and prosperity of California. The COVID-19 global pandemic laid inequity for all of us to see, and that inequity carries on the smallest of shoulders as well as the broadest. The images of siblings crowded around a small kitchen table sharing one device, the empty shelves at every grocery store, and the overwhelming sense of uncertainty have seared into our memories. With your support, shoulder to shoulder with advocates for accountability, I, as a legislator and as chair of Budget Sub-4, the Committee on State Administration, can continue to ensure that ours is a more golden state that keeps the promise of a California for all, not a California for some. I'm so glad that we are having these important conversations about how to heal our communities and how do we ensure equity. Thank you to the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools and everyone participating in today's webinar. Together, we can ensure that our communities stay safe, stay healthy, and that we can move forward as a more resilient community. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you today, and I hope you have a wonderful seminar.
Thank you, Assembly Member Wendy Carrillo, and applause for that. I was really inspired by the way that she centered this idea about healing and rebuilding equitably in this moment, and I appreciate all your legislative efforts as well, as it's important that we spread the word about how to keep people safe and how to make sure folks are vaccinated as well. Well, we are going to have a dynamic conversation. I will say, some of this is selfish. I asked some of the people I respect the most in Los Angeles, people who have committed their careers, people who grew up here, to get together and have a cross-sector dialogue about how we rebuild together given this moment. I know when we think about the uprisings, a lot of us remember that our communities were never the same after. that because of the uprisings, many of us went into leadership. Many of us thought differently about how we build community and how we work together. And we were different because of it. And I think even though the pandemic is ongoing, this moment is a time for rebuilding as well and healing, and we will be different. LA will be different. And these are a lot of folks who are going to make sure that LA is different. So I'm excited to have this discussion. So welcome our panelists. I am going to have them introduce themselves. Really quickly, I'll say Aurea Montes Rodriguez is from Community Coalition. D'Artagnan Scorza, Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza is with LA County. Christine Margiotta is with the Social Venture Partners. And Dr. Gloria Itzel Montiel is from AltaMed. And my first question is, in this moment, how are you practicing self-care and care for others? Because I believe it really starts with the individual. And I will start with Dr. Scorza. I'll also say go Bruins, because we both went to undergrad at UCLA, and I believe you're on the board of the UCLA Alumni Association. I will be paying my dues soon. Why don't you start, Dart?
Thank you so much, Ryan. And again, it's such a pleasure to be here with you and with all of you and my fellow panelists. It's an honor to be in this conversation. I think we're in a moment in LA's history and in our world's history where the work we're doing matters now more than ever, right? Before I do an introduction, I just want to briefly open it up with a land acknowledgement. As the Executive Director of Racial Equity for LA County, we talk about care, right? It's care for ourselves, care for others, and care for the land. And I just want to acknowledge and recognize the first people of this ancestral and unceded territory, the land that today we call LA County. With respect to their elders past and present, I recognize the Tongva, Tataviam, and Chumash as the original stewards of this land, and as those to whom we'd like to continue to lift up along with their stories and their culture. I am proud to be the inaugural Executive Director of Racial Equity for LA County. In the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Unit, we are really focused on helping to eliminate structural racism bias, not only within LA County's institutions, but also throughout all of LA County. You may be aware of the work that LA County is doing to return Bruce's Beach to the lawful descendants of both Will and Charles Bruce, right, in Manhattan Beach. You may not also hear about the work that LA County is doing with some of our amazing community partners, including some of those who are on this panel today, to think about how we allocate ARPA resources, American Rescue Plan Act resources, utilizing equity principles and formulas that target the communities that are most in need. And all of that means that I'm really busy, and there's a lot of good work that's going on. So one of the ways I take care of myself is with my family. My wife and my 2 kids, soon to be 3, love to go camping, and we love to get out in our RV, honestly. And we'll get out. We'll go up to Needles. We'll get up to Parker. We'll go down to Lake Elsinore. We'll just take some time and sit on the beach or kayak and just relax, right? Just really take a break and spend time. Watch my daughter swing on the swings and play in the jungle gym. I mean, it seems, for me at least, it sometimes feels simple, but it's so refreshing and so rewarding to have that time together. So again, thank you so much for having me here, and I look forward to our conversation together today.
Thank you, Dr. Dart. I'm going to ask Christine Margiotta the same question. How are you taking care of yourself and or others in this moment?
Thanks so much, Ryan, and I'm so happy to be here as well. Ryan, you have been my role model around holding this space of love and justice, and you really bring the love to this work and fiercely hold that space of justice. So I am so excited for this conversation, so happy to be here. Christine Margiotta, I'm the Executive Director of Social Venture Partners Los Angeles. SVP is a nonprofit organization that primarily invests in early stage social justice efforts all across Los Angeles, particularly those who are led by folks who are directly impacted by the systems they're seeking to transform and redesign. We also work to grow the tent of folks who are moving money and power and people power around racial and social justice. So that's what we're all about. And self-care for me in this last year and a half has really been about a practice of learning to say no. I am someone, I've got young kids, and my wife and I have been juggling working and kid care. And I think in the past, if I was at work, I would feel guilty that I wasn't with my kids. If I was with my kids, I felt guilty that I wasn't working. And as a result, I said yes to everything. Anytime someone wanted something from me, it was a yes, because, it's not enough. I'm not giving enough in any of these spaces. And I feel very lucky that I've had this beautiful convergence of family and work over the last year and a half, which has not always felt beautiful and like a gift, but I am grateful for it. And it has helped me grow in my practice of learning to say no, both setting boundaries around our family time, around my me time, my work time, all of it, locking the door sometimes, but mostly, enjoying my kids running in during Zooms and having that blend, but also honoring my time and space and being able to be present in each of those. So thank you for the question, and really happy to be here.
I appreciate that candor. How many of us are also learning to say no in this moment, learning how to create boundaries, learning to figure out how to prioritize things, given what we've learned the last 16 months? I appreciate that. I should say this. I've known D'Artagnan since he was an undergrad. Christina and I had the privilege to work at the United Way. And I've known Aurea since I was 15. I did some youth organizing work with a group called Youth United for Community Action. So I'm excited to pass the mic to one of the people I consider my mentor in the work, to be honest, Aurea Montes Rodriguez.
Oh, Ryan, thank you so much for that. I am so fortunate that we've known each other as long as we have. We've both supported each other and grown together. So happy to be here. I'm Executive Vice President at Community Coalition, a social justice organization founded in 1990 sadly in a very similar time to the period that we're going through with the COVID pandemic. We were founded to deal with the root causes of the crack epidemic and its devastating impact on the South LA community. And for 30 years, Community Coalition has worked to transform the root causes of social and economic conditions that foster addiction, crime, violence, and poverty by building a permanent, and I want to say permanent, if you come to 81st and Vermont, you will see a beautiful headquarters that serves as a community institution and that centers the voices and leadership of Black and brown people, including youth. From the very beginning, we were founded as multiracial and intergenerational in all of the work that we do. And that's because our founders understood the power that lies in bringing people together and serving as a part of a larger movement. And, we know firsthand that the people closest to the issues are the ones who are best equipped to lead to transformation in our communities. So our main strategies are community organizing, civic engagement, inside and outside strategy, which means we put pressure, from the outside and by having a real base on elected officials and being a part of strategic alliances, and also using arts and culture to bring in folks who would otherwise not get involved in, community organizing work. And we employ these strategies to build the leadership pipeline of Black and brown residents, and in order to build people and political power. And, I've had the honor of being growing up in the organization, really. I got here right out of college, and Ryan, that's when we met, when I was doing an internship out of college and you were doing the high school organizing fellowship through Youth United through Community Action. And, it was actually during my early 20s that I began to practice self-care. And I did that because my mom, and I'm an immigrant, my mom's an immigrant, and she worked in the garment industry. She got really sick because of the harsh, environmental conditions at her factory. And that really shook me. It shook me profoundly. And, I attended a yoga class at Community Coalition and committed that, and I want to bring in a shiro of mine, Audre Lorde, who says that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And I want to invoke her because for me, practicing yoga has been really grounding. And even though I've had ebbs and flows over the years, I was actually in a lull for about 2 years in my practice before the pandemic hit. And as soon as it became clear that this was not going to end soon, I recommitted to my practice and called a yogi that I trust and said, will you teach virtually? And I will bring people to your class. And I did that because I think that learning in community is both a source of motivation and also accountability. And then just a little bit about my family. I have 2 teenagers and a preteen, and I'm married. And so that is a busy house for 2 working parents and active children. And so in terms of self-care, very much like Dart and Christine, I found things that would nourish us. And in my house, it was cooking wholesome meals. Also to challenge what would have become a gendered role as an immigrant woman and mom, where the expectation would be that I cook. So I said, we're gonna share this responsibility. And, we learned how to cook together and how to create time to sit and eat together, because before the pandemic, we were all always on the go. And so I'll pause there.
There was so much. Who doesn't want to sit down with Aurea and be like, okay, so that was complex and nuanced and tells us the history. And I appreciate your leadership. And I'm sure there are questions just on that, which I appreciate. But I'm going to segue to Dr. Gloria Itzel Montiel from AltaMed, somebody I have just met through this experience, who's a leader in health equity, but also a professor. So I'm going to switch I'm going to call you Dr. Professor, because I know you have some students here as well. So Gloria, take it away.
Yes. Yeah, this semester I've been very privileged to teach my first MPH class at Cal State Fullerton. So I haven't met the students yet, but I am super excited that they have been able to join this panel, and really grateful because our class doesn't even start when we started the panel, so some of them joined us. But as you mentioned, Ryan, that a lot of my work in healthcare during the pandemic has been really difficult to see what our communities have gone through, and a lot of not only just the culmination of historic disinvestment in our communities. And so in order to be kind of that individual that continues to show up for community, it's really important for me to ground myself. And so the way I've practiced self-care over the past year has been through getting out in nature. I also started hanging bird feeders outside of my house for hummingbirds, and started doing photography of hummingbirds. And I think that just the little things that bring us joy have been super important.
Thank you, Gloria. Really appreciate that. And excited that we're going to engage even more in the discussion that's going to tie into that. I'll also say, having been on a lot of these webinars, I'm sure this is your first webinar. You've not been on a webinar in the last 16 months, but I'm appreciative that this is not just a white male panel. I'm appreciative that it has gender diversity. I'm appreciative that we're going to censor that discussion with people who are represent the communities that we serve. So speaking of service, we've been talking a lot about rebuilding. I even see that being uplifted in the conversation today. As we think about what we need to do to really move forward. I've heard a community leader say that beyond COVID, our communities were ailing with several inequities, including the historical exclusion and lack of access of essential supports that came to light during the pandemic. So from your role and perspective, can you tell us about the disparities that you've seen exacerbated by the pandemic? And what specific communities in Los Angeles have you seen impacted the most, based on the work that you do, based on your context, maybe even based on your personal journey? And I will begin with Dr. Montiel. Oh, we lost. Okay, I will begin. I'm sure she's having a couple of challenges. She'll be back. So I will begin with Christine Margiotta.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I think I think not only have disparities been exacerbated by this pandemic, but also I think our community's awareness of them. I'm appreciating the dialogue that's been lifted up during the last 18 months, that people have more awareness than ever of the disparities that were already there and the ways that the pandemic has exacerbated that. When you were asking this question, I thought about a few different groups. First, I was thinking about John Powell, who talked about at the beginning of the pandemic, he was reflecting on this topic of belonging and how we all belong to one another, and how a moment of a health pandemic just makes that more explicit than ever, just how much we belong to one another, and our collective health and well-being is intertwined. And I just, given the work that I've done over my career, I've thought a lot about folks who are sleeping on our streets these last 18 months, folks who are living in jail and prison, and just the horrific conditions that folks were living in before, and how much worse a health pandemic makes those living conditions. And I also think about workers. You know, we had so many conversations about essential workers during this time. And I think about anyone who has been doing work on the front lines in our community. You know, we talk so much about health workers, grocery store workers. I think about our teachers. I know we have lots of teachers here. I think about folks who are providing direct services to our community, who, you know, so often are doing the hardest work, who are on the front lines, who are paid the lowest, who are experiencing even more trauma during this time, both to themselves and the secondary trauma of being with folks in this. So those are some of the folks that have been on my mind and heart throughout this time.
Thank you for that. You know, Aurea, the same question, and also, you know, Christine's bringing up essential workers as well. How do you think about that? I'm just connecting that to the story of your mother and talking about the garment industry here in Los Angeles.
Well, Christine, I echo all of the, communities that you lifted up, and, the essential families. I mean, we talk about high need communities in the LAUSD and across the country, and those are communities that have concentrated poverty, but also that are made up of mostly Black and Brown residents, large numbers of essential families or essential workers, and what I consider essential families, because these families are living in high density areas, in households with multi-generations, so grandma, children, grandchildren, all really working together to keep our city and our county afloat, but yet very little acknowledgement of the contributions that they make to our economy, to our city, our county, and our region. And, for me, the two groups that I would like to lift up, or actually it's three, it's, high and highest needs students, Black and Brown, attending some of the schools that have experienced the most, disinvestment, both public and private, women who lost their job, but still had to figure out how to provide financially for their households, and elders who have, been the most stable part of communities like South LA, and whose lives were at real risk when the surge happened, because their children and grandchildren had to go out of the home to work. And so, I carry, women, children, and essential workers really close to my heart in the work that we're doing, because they have been disproportionately impacted. And I am proud to say, Ryan, that some of the work that we have done at the district, at the city, and that we're doing with Dr. Scorza and the County Board of Supervisors is really seeking to center their needs and their voices during this period, because no recovery will be possible if we leave them behind or forget that they have been devastated during this time.
let's not forget, and I think that's an important, anytime we talk about historical shifts, it's important that we think about who's centered in those conversations. And I think that's a really good segue to D'Artagnan. So Dr. Dart, and you're thinking, we think about systems in this moment. We've all had to rely on systems. We've had to rely on our public health systems. Clearly, educational systems have shifted. At the partnership, we think of this as a punctuated equilibrium moment. This idea that, rapid change happens between long periods of little to no change, and it feels like it's been 17 months of just change that we've all had to adapt to. So as someone who is thinking about racial equity, what do you think is going to change moving forward for us? What's the change that needs to happen? But what are the things that you've seen change around systems, around our communities, that you think are going to have a lasting impact?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Ryan. And Aurea really lifted up some incredible points about who's been most impacted. And I will tell you that that question reminds me of a comment one of my colleagues in the UC system made. He said, when there's crisis has the potential to create opportunity, right? Opportunity for change. And I think while we don't, advocate for suffering, there's always an opportunity for us to really work to get things right. Because the pandemic did reveal so many inequities, right? So many folks stood up and said, we cannot go back, right? We cannot suffer the way things were before. And I think that willingness and desire to not allow for the conditions that our young folk and that our residents live in to continue and to be the way they were prior to the pandemic is what's fueling that change. Now, in terms of what the change will look like, I can tell you at the county, it's incredible. I mean, for the first time in the history of the county, we have a board of supervisors that's, has 5 self-identified females, right, who are leading the county and who are centering equity in all that we do. I mean, right now we're working on, for example, looking at the dollars that are coming in from ARPA and thinking about the communities that are most impacted by the pandemic, and not just thinking about them and identifying them at the census tract or zip code level, but we're considering how we allocate those resources to ensure that people who were most impacted by the pandemic are able to recover more quickly, right? In other words, targeting those resources to communities that are, greatest in need. And we know those neighborhoods, right? We know it's Pomona and El Monte and some neighborhoods in Downey and Inglewood and Compton and Palmdale, right? So we know that those are the places where those resources need to go so that small businesses can recover and children can receive the services they need so that we can target resources to folk who are facing homelessness. One of the things that I'm excited about in the county is we've built out sort of a data system that's allowing us to analyze communities that are most impacted by the pandemic with the help of Aurea and the coalition partners that she's working with, folk like the Advancement Project and others. But we're not only layering that data with sort of the geographies of need in LA County, but we're exploring, where are our services and where are we lacking services? Where are people, for example, most likely to be vulnerable as a result of, sort of the incarceration practices and policies that exist in that neighborhood, or where is historical redlining taking place? And I'm sure it would be no surprise to a lot of folk that if you looked at the old FHA redlining maps, that a lot of the communities that are still suffering today were those that were given a grade of D, right, back then, that were told that, that were labeled as being undesirable. So what this is allowing us to do is to take a step back, look at the geography in LA County, look at the landscape, and think about how we invest our resources into those neighborhoods that are most in need. So I'm incredibly excited about what that means and what that's going to allow us to do, because ultimately by aligning those resources, we can start to close racial disparities and close racial gaps. We can begin to improve the life trajectories of folk and align our county services and systems with the needs that we see in community.
you've hit it on the nail, and I actually want to shift to a question because shift to another question for a couple of reasons. One, you mentioned resource equity, and I think that's going to be a through line. Like, how do we get resources to highest need folks? You mentioned data, and I will say data are sexy. Like, you know, as somebody who believes that we need the right data that can actually move the work. But you mentioned intersectionality, that we have to work with housing, and we have to think about economic systems. We have to think about our county systems together. So really quickly, you know, to the entire panel, how do we do that? We're about to rebuild. We can reimagine, and if we've learned something, we should reimagine how we do things differently. So how can system leaders more readily work together to help our students and families better navigate various systems to thrive? And how can different systems shift to meet the needs of stakeholders? And I am thinking about Aurea's point. I mean, she brought in Audre Lorde in this discussion. So I will quote again another Audre Lorde point. So we're talking about systems. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So how do we reimagine systems in this moment? And I will hand it to Aurea.
Thank you, Ryan. You know, this is a really important question. And I think that if we have learned about who are the most important individuals in our communities, it's students, parents, and community members, and lifting up their voices in their leadership in terms of what our communities need to radically recover and to recover in a way that communicates that we love the people who make up our communities. That's going to require for systems leaders to really welcome both outside pressure, outside voice, and outside accountability. And having open and transparent communications, or open communications and transparent decision making, is critical to that. And I say that because at the LAUSD, it has been young people, parents, and community organizations that have forced the conversation of equity. It has been young people that have pushed the adults to say, not only are we calling for a decreased investment in police, but we are asking for the defunding of school police. That was something that was not possible before the movement for Black Lives Matter led to, you know, national and global protests for the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. And so how do we continue to let the young people and community members be at the forefront of these decisions that are going to move our systems forward? If we don't do that, we will continue to see business as usual. And business as usual was not working for Black and Brown students and for residents in high-need communities. And I think that there is no shortcut. So at Community Coalition, we say there are no shortcuts, there are only detours, right? And that's really important because we cannot speak for community if there is, you know, if there are differences of opinion of how we get to a different place, those conversations need to be had. And I just want to lift up one example that is not about systems, but that is about the pandemic that we're experiencing and vaccinations. I am beginning to see, especially as a Delta variant, you know, creates another wave or surge, right, that is impacting even vaccinated individuals, blaming and shaming of people in under-vaccinated communities that have been scared, that have not trusted the vaccine. And that to me is dangerous. It is dangerous because it perpetuates those systems, the master systems and tools that oppress our communities. Because the reason our folks are distrustful, right, or distrusting of the vaccine is because these systems have not worked for them. Many of the residents that we work with have talked about the experiences that they've had, the really difficult and real experiences when they've tried to access healthcare. Some of our residents have told our canvassers when they're at the door and asking them or doing education around the vaccine, asking them to get vaccinated, they're like, wait, we never saw anyone knock on our door. especially government, and look at what our streets look like. Look at our unhoused neighbors. And now you're coming and asking me to get vaccinated. That just doesn't add up. That is really, really sad, you know? And so, you know, at Community Coalition, and I'll pause, we have a testing and vaccine site that's right in front. And I love walking into the office and seeing people, families with children, bring their entire families to access testing and to access the vaccine. And we're not a healthcare provider, but we felt that showing love and modeling the types of systems that we need to have are ones that really center and understand what our residents and families have experienced and why they are scared, even though the cost has been, you know, so significant to our community. Many folks have lost people directly to COVID, as you did, Ryan, and, you know, my condolences still, because I know that the grieving process, especially for a loved one, is real, and for a parent is real. And some of our folks have also lost, you know, family members because they couldn't access healthcare during the pandemic because our hospitals were so overwhelmed and their conditions went untreated. And it's been heartbreaking. It's really taken a toll. So there are so many systems that need transformation, that need to be reimagined. And that is the job of all of us that are on, you know, this webinar.
Christine, I want you to react to that. What do you think about what you just heard Aurea say? And I should just say, Dr. Montiel is having some internet problems, and we know the digital equity divide is real. And Dart mentioned redlining. If you look at maps where you can actually get high quality internet, they look just like those redlining maps. But Christine, tell me what you thought about what Aurea said in this question.
Yeah, Aurea, I love those reflections, and I was noting when you were lifting up the students in their work to move police out of our schools. I live in a city in San Gabriel Valley, and it has been the Black and Brown students in our high school who have worked tirelessly over the last year to get the school resource officer out of our high school. And finally, we're successful in doing that, but it was their labor and their telling of their stories over and over and over again. And finally, you know, the adults who run our city listened, and enough people, you know, joined forces with them. But it was truly in centering their voices and following their lead that change happened, and that I believe our city will be much better off reinvesting those resources. And really, what they lifted up was it's time to reimagine what safety looks like. You know, what they were saying is, you know, our mental health is suffering. We're losing our peers to suicide, to addiction. You know, a school resource officer on our campus is not solving for that. You all are solving for the wrong problem. You're asking the wrong question. So I so echo your reflection on that. And Ryan, I love the framing in the question, because I often think about, you know, this two-part question of how do we support folks in navigating our systems as they are, and how do we reimagine our systems to support folks. And I thought about this a lot as our son started kindergarten about 2 years ago now. And he would be sent home every day with a slip of paper that said, how did I do today? And it said I had a day that was good or a day that could have gone better. And his teacher would circle which one it was every day and send it home with him. And no one ever asked him how his day was. They were basically saying, here's how you did on navigating our system. And we weren't asking that bigger question of how could the system better support each of our kids. And he was fine, you know, he did fine. He had some tough moments there, but it was, you know, I was struck by that frame of how often we're asking the question of, you know, evaluating, in this case, young people on how are you doing navigating our system versus how could the system better support you and your needs. So I think that's, you know, I appreciate that you were holding up both of those questions, because there's a reality of what is, And I'm so hopeful that we're in this transition moment where we're starting to ask ourselves the question of how can our systems better support our people, because we know that every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it's getting, right? Like these systems, it is not coincidence that Black and Latinx folks are disproportionately harmed by our systems. And, you know, to the Audre Lorde quote you shared, we're not going to get new systems with the same folks trying to redesign them. So our goal and our work at SVP has been all about how do we center folks who have been impacted by systems to be at the heart of redesigning them, and how can we move money and proximity to power and decision-making power to people who are directly impacted so that we can redesign from a completely different place and mindset.
Christine, if you don't preach today, I mean, if you don't preach today, I mean, truthfully, the idea that we put onus on individuals to navigate systems rather than asking systems to change is real. And it's striking because people build systems and then spend millions of dollars to say, we're going to teach you how to navigate these systems rather than investing that money just to redesign the system to meet folks where they're at. That is powerful. And that is like a moment that is real. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And I want to talk about population we do this to a lot and who was disproportionately impacted. And I'm going to throw this question to D'Artagnan. You know, we talked, you know, I mentioned, earlier that my father passed during the pandemic, but we know that all communities have suffered a loss. However, there's been a disparate impact, obviously, on elders. And I think we started to talk about this in Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities. In fact, we may all, at some point when we can all get together, we've grieved individually about the loss of elders, but there's a collective consciousness about a community that's lost so many of our folks who have taught us, who've supported us because of the pandemic, but also because of all the systems that surround the pandemic. So how do you think in this moment, D'Artagnan, how do we come to grips with losing a generation of elders, and how do we think differently about how we support those who are often most marginalized within our systems?
Well, that's such a powerful and incredible question. You know, first of all, let me just start by saying that, again, I'm sorry, and my heart goes out to a lot of the folk that have lost family and friends during this time. Many of us have experienced and seen the suffering of the suffering that's emerged from that loss, as well as those who are caring for people in the middle of that loss, right? It's both the sort of trauma and the experience that we're all going through, as well as the secondary trauma that many of our healthcare workers and our teachers and so many folk that serve the people that we love are going through as well. You know, when I think about what it would take for our systems specifically to respond to that loss, specifically here in the county, I'm proud to say that our board has prioritized aligning services to our elders, making sure that those who are at home alone, who don't have family, are receiving meal support. Those who are in need of healthcare, receive a mobile clinic that comes to their house, right? Talking about meeting people where they are, as opposed to asking an elder to leave their home and get on the bus and go to a clinic, right? No, I think the county has done a really good job of trying to respond to those needs and go to them. And so, there's sort of a collective responsibility to recognize the vulnerability of our elders in our communities, but to also recognize the wisdom that they have and the wisdom we want to maintain, right? When our elders leave us too soon, we lose that wisdom. And we lose that ability to transfer that knowledge and apply that knowledge and that history to the circumstances that we face today. So I would just say that from the place that I'm sitting at, when we think about, and when I think about what it means to address the needs of our elders and what it means to close, racial disparities, and to consider sort of the intergenerational relationship between our elders and the children they care for, the families they still support, the way in which they provided for our young folk over time, it requires that we prioritize their needs in our community as well, and in our systems and in our agencies and in our institutions, that we don't forget about them and their needs over time. So I don't know if I have the perfect answer for that, but what I will say is that I really just want to lift up this idea that we have to be responsive to them, and we have to be responsive enough to alter what we're doing so that it addresses those needs, especially as they arise.
I appreciate the thoughtful response, and I'm glad you're doing the work at the county, because I know you're thinking about how we connect folks intergenerationally. Aurea, Christine, would either of you want to address the question as well?
I would, and I think I would like to on two parts. I'm an immigrant to South LA, but a lifelong resident of South LA, and the intergenerational life and spirit in our community is real. Elders have cared for their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and that is not anecdotal. That is my experience, or maybe it is anecdotal, but I've seen it broadly. And during the COVID pandemic, a number of individuals, have lost their loved ones, as we said. You, Alberto, our CEO at Community Coalition. My mom's been in and out of the hospital 3 times since the pandemic, and every day I wake up and I thank God that she is still with us. And when she stabilizes, I am so grateful, and I share those personal because it's real. Like our elders, their health has really, their health conditions have been exacerbated. And I mentor an alumni of our youth programs that runs an organization called Comunidades Indígenas en Liderazgo. They work with the migrant immigrant community. And they have talked about all of the elders that come from different parts of Mexico and Central America that spoke their indigenous languages and had their traditions and their cultures. And when that elder passed, if the language was not passed down to their families, that language is gone. And they have to try to find someone else in the home country to rebuild. And that is a tremendous loss. And I don't think we should take that lightly. I agree with Dr. Dart that we should come together and collectively grieve, right? And I identify, Ryan, when we honor what we call the keepers of our flame. That's how we refer to our elders at Community Coalition. On the policy side, we have been pushing through the Make LA Whole Coalition with SEIU 2015, Brotherhood Crusade Advancement Project, and 50 organizations that the city invest in elder care in housing and upgrading their housing, because housing matters, just the quality and the ability for them to continue to stay independent. Also for care, not just for HHH, but also for other types of care that they can get in their home so that they don't have to leave their families. At the county, we are also calling on the equitable funding through the American Rescue Plan dollars, and lifting up the needs of elders is something that we really want to see centered in terms of the investments of the rescue dollars. And then yesterday I attended an event at the invitation of SIU 2015 where they honored Reverend Lawson, and they are going to lead a campaign to look at, providing home care workers $20 an hour. Why we don't pay healthcare workers $20 an hour already is beyond my understanding, but I think that really supporting campaigns like the campaign that they're launching is super important and imperative for all of us to do, because these are the folks that are caring for our elders in our community. And if they don't have compensation, it is not a job that they can keep as soon as they have an opportunity to move on. And so that's something that we can all get behind, is a campaign to pay home care workers, better, and to increase the workforce, because they are taking care of some of the most important individuals in our communities.
I'm going to actually, this is a really good tie to a question we got from the audience. And I know we are running against time. But speaking of time, this is actually related to time. So what commitments, will you make, or your organization's making, to aid in the upcoming wave of housing evictions and homelessness and gentrification that is in the wake of the pandemic and a number of disparities that are happening? And how can everyone in these spaces help push the limits within our powers in this upcoming fight? Who'd like to take this? Someone wrote, housing is everything. I might pass the mic to Christine here, given the work you've done around this issue first.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this. It's a great question. And we are in a moment of crisis where we already have tens of thousands of unhoused folks here in LA County, and so many more who are on the brink. And I'll say, in terms of commitments for our organization and for me personally, it's really about following the lead of folks who are impacted. And so I would say to anyone here, to find folks in your community who are leading these fights. I think there are policy battles happening on these fronts right now. Both LA City, we're seeing an increase in criminalization of unhoused folks throughout LA County as well. We need to make sure that the eviction protections that are in place are sustained and also strengthened. So there are so many policy battles locally, nationally, to get involved in, where there are great folks already leading. And if anyone here is with an organization doing that work, please feel free to share that in the chat. And I think the other piece here that's been more lifted up through the pandemic is mutual aid efforts in your community. So that, so much of the support and healing that can happen in the immediate term is local and comes through our mutual aid, comes through us acknowledging the interconnectedness in our local communities. So I would say that kind of two-pronged piece of, give directly to folks who are providing immediate relief, and get involved in those policy fights in your community. Figure out who's leading the charge and make those phone calls, do the advocacy locally, and use for each of us to use our power where we can.
And I will say in the chat, someone said our students feel housing pressure so deeply, and that's real. Our students, our families, and our educators, given the way the market is even going right now. Aurea, do you have some perspectives?
Yeah, that comment is really an important one to lift up. Our young people that are in high school and in college, early in college, they are trying to do well academically while working full time to help their families stay housed. And, that will forever change their lives, because they cannot be a student first. They have an obligation and responsibility to their families first, because they are at the brink of houselessness. And we've seen that with a lot of the young people that we work with at Community Coalition through our organizing at South LA high schools. And, we conducted a poll of over 4,000 residents, and we're finishing a youth-specific one that is going to have the voices of 500 young people in South LA. And, for us, we are listening, to hear from them what they want to see us focus on as Community Coalition, but the urgency is real. The time is now, you know, in terms of how do we keep these families housed? Because as soon as the eviction protections end, and, you know, the headlines of the federal dollars that families have not been able to access, even more so in other parts of the country, right? Is really harmful to our families. Wherever you drive in South LA, you see unhoused, and throughout the city, right? But I think that South LA is really helping more families than other parts of the city in terms of unhoused neighbors. And so we have got to, you know, really commit and support families, both staying housed and bringing affordable housing to individuals that are ready to move into supportive housing.
Well,
Right. Last thing, we learned that people from other states can have priority access to housing in South LA. How that's happening, that's the kind of research that we're doing. Why would that happen when we have so many people here that are asking for shelter? We're doing, again, a deep study, but, you know, not that those folks do not deserve and shouldn't be housed, but there are residents here who have been waiting for before the pandemic, during the pandemic, that we need to, you know, prioritize for the new housing that becomes available.
Thank you for that. You quick last word, Dr. Scorza?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, I want to just give the disclaimer that I do not speak for the county, but I do recognize that the leadership of our board has staked out a significant commitment to investing in not only building affordable housing, but making sure that businesses get the rent relief they need, you know, that there's advocacy and tenant support, eviction defense services. So I think the county has done a really phenomenal job stepping up. Now there's more that needs to be done, but I just want to acknowledge that that, you know, the county is really working, especially in applying these ARPA dollars, to make sure that it goes directly to those that are in need. And with like the targeted resources, I think that is a demonstration of the commitment the county has made to help address the issues that that were raised in that question. So, you know, I'm happy to share more about that, but again, it just lifts up and speaks to the commitment of this board and where they're headed and their leadership, and making sure that we respond to the needs of residents here in and throughout our county. I would also say people should know that the cities, and LA County has 88 cities and school districts, 80 school districts plus one, if you consider LACO, right? In addition to a number of partners like PLAS that are leading this work, right? But the school districts and the cities also received ARPA dollars. And these cities and school districts can use their funds to help address the housing issues that have emerged. So just keep in mind, right, that while organizations can do what they need to do, there's still a place for advocacy with our local cities, so that you know, folk understand, and with our local school districts, so that folk understand that those resources came to a lot of municipal agencies, and you can you know, advocate and work with those agencies to make sure those resources are targeted to our community members who are most in need.
Thank you for that. And I will just say LAUSD is slated to receive $5 to $6 billion in ARPA funds, and another additional $1 to $2.3 billion in ESSER 3 funds that need to be spent out by 2024. So clearly there are resources coming from a lot of different places. I'm going to end here. We are a little over time. One of my favorite quotes is by Dr. Cornel West. He says, "Justice is what love looks like in public." I feel like that has been a theme here about how we can not only work together to move the needle, but also making sure that we're centering those who have historically been under-resourced at the heart of the way we think about the work. I will say this: Aurea, Christine, and D'Artagnan, I already know, are signed up to think about rebuilding and healing equitably. And this is not the last time we'll hear from them, and hopefully not even hear from them together. Hopefully I can invite you to a dinner party, because I have like 5 more questions for you. I was very fascinated. Everyone, thank our panelists in the chat. Thank them for going deep in an important issue. May we continue the discussion. Please continue to follow the partnership. You'll see that you'll have all of our tags here. We will continue the discussion because we know that this is an issue that's so supportive. Once again, thank parents and the students and the families and the healthcare workers, all those who joined us. And let us know what you think today. We're going to put a exit ticket in the link. And if you're interested in continuing to partner with us on this issue, that's really important. Thank you again for your time. We look forward to seeing you in love and in justice. Take care of yourselves. Bye.